I really had no ambition to be singer. I really didn't want to come out from behind the drums.
This is a story about an accidental icon.
They always say a band is only as good as its drummer, and he was a great drummer.
A rock and roll fairy tale about the long and lonely journey from the drum stool at the back of the stage to the mic stand at the front.
I think as soon as Phil Collins starts on lead vocals with Genesis, you knew that they were never going to be the same again.
An unlikely frontman, an even unlikelier solo artist.
People have said over the years, don't you get embarrassed by writing about your life? And that's what you're supposed to do, isn't it? I think you're supposed to write about the truth and what's happening to you.
An artist who found his voice in the depths of heartbreak.
I wouldn't save you if you were drowning, yeah? Those are deep lines. You need to understand what my man's saying to understand the angst and the pain.
And translated it into something the whole world could understand.
It emotionally, overtly, subliminally blew me away. It became, here's a cue in search of a movie.
And yet somehow he remained the guy he was at the start of it all.
I think I'm wonderfully unhip, actually. Look under unhip in the dictionary and you'll see a picture of me.
He was passionate about the music. He wasn't passionate about the fame or getting the money or whatever. He was there to play the drums or to sing or to perform for people and make people happy.
I'm Zoe Ball, and I'm about to tell you the story of the man who broke every rule of rock and roll superstardom and was rewarded with the rarest of things, permanence. From BBC Sounds, this is Era's Phil Collins. Episode 1, In the Beginning. Have you heard the one about the two rock stars who walk into a bar? We're in Chicago in 1983, and this bar happens to be in the Ambassador East, one of the most prestigious hotels in America.
There's nothing worse than a hotel like that. We were allowed to use the lobby and the elevator, but we couldn't go into anything, bar, restaurants, and yet we were paying for it.
Now, it's worth pointing out that a hotel might have some basis for turning away Robert Plant, former lead singer of Hellraiser's Led Zeppelin. At the bar's entrance, the maitre d' takes in the iconic rock god with his lion's mane of hair.
He was wearing a suit, a willy-wear suit, which was actually, quite loud checks.
And he must be feeling generous because he nods him right through. Then he turns to Robert Plant's companion.
I had a leather jacket on, and I believe I had jeans on, but, they weren't scruffy jeans, and it was a brand new leather jacket. But, this is... I sound like a complainer, don't I?
The maitre d' looks this unassuming gentleman up and down. If he recognises him, he doesn't show it.
The fact is, we went down there for a drink in the pump room in the Ambassador East Hotel in Chicago. For those of you that want to visit, just take a jacket.
Apologies, Mr. Collins. Jacket required. There's a reason why I want to start this story here, with an underdressed Phil Collins stranded outside an elite hotel bar. At this moment in history, Phil's already got a decade under his belt in a band with a huge devoted following. And he's got 2 Billboard Top 10 albums as a solo artist. His career is a triumph by anyone's standards. Yet here he is, shuffling awkwardly on the plush carpeted floor. Access denied. And he's not about to make a fuss. That's not his style.
I'm probably one of the most level-headed, straight people that I know. You know what I mean? I don't travel with an entourage. I don't muscle in and say, do you know who I am?
But he is going to remember it. And I want you to remember it too. Jacket required? We'll have to see about that.
Well, the biggest news in music this week has undoubtedly been those Grammy Awards in America. Phil Collins of Britain has plenty of reason to celebrate because not only was he given the award for Best Male Singer in the Grammys, but his latest album, No Jacket Required, went straight to #1 in Britain this week.
We already know where this story ends up. It ends up with Phil Collins showing everyone who doubts him, Snooty Dorman included, exactly what he's capable of. The more important question for now is, where does this story begin?
Let's talk about Phil Collins, the boy. The most riveting image I've come across of you is you smiling from the cover of a 9-penny knitting pattern for emu wools, wearing a very smart moss-stitch V-neck sweater.
How many rock idols got their first start as cherubic young boys modelling knitting patterns? Only one that I can think of. But then Phil Collins is not like other rock stars. Philip David Charles Collins was born in West London on the 30th of January 1951. The youngest of 3 children born to June Winifred, who worked at a toy shop, and Greville Collins.
Your dad worked in insurance in the city, didn't he? And you all lived in West London.
Yeah, we lived in Hounslow, and he was in the city for 40 years with Sun Alliance.
So where did this urge to perform come from then?
Where indeed?
When I was actually 3, apparently, I don't profess to remember this, but apparently I was given a toy drum for Christmas, and apparently I really took to it. And whereas all the other things ended up in the cupboard, the toy drum stayed out. As a result, my uncle, Reginald Lenn, made me a little drum kit that fitted in a suitcase, and that was when I was 5 years old. So I used to sit there on a chair and just bash.
Phil was a born performer. It ran in the family.
My dad in the yacht club in Twickenham helped start it. And, of course, they had annual shows, that they used to put on, pantomimes and things. And my mum used to sing and dance at these shows, and my father got up and sang a couple of West Country songs, early doses, and there's a funny man, all that kind of thing, which I've since perfected. So all the whole family did it, and I guess it just became something I did. And so I was sitting playing the drums with them from the age of 7 or 8 onwards.
Now, an armchair analyst might say that already Phil was being pulled in 2 very different directions. Contained within his family was a model for both dutiful suburban living and the circus life of a performer. And as he arrived into his teens, fate would nudge him a little further down one of those paths.
What happened was my mum befriended a lady that had a dancing school, Barbara Speak, and Barbara Speak at that time decided to enlarge the thing and go to an agency for kids, and asked my mum if she would handle it. Now, my mum, who by this time had stopped working at the toy shop, was at home and didn't have much to do. My dad was working. My brother and sister were probably at this point also working in the insurance company, as my dad felt that everybody should go the same way he did. But my mum basically ran the agency, and I remember the day, a call came through. I was 14. It must have been 63, 64. Because Oliver had been started in 60, 61, and they wanted a boy to play the Artful Dodger. I went for 2 or 3 recalls, and I ended up getting the job.
Consider yourself at home.
When Phil proudly reported his good news to the headmaster of his grammar school, he was told he'd be unable to continue his studies if he wanted to take the part.
So I went back and told my mum and dad, and they said, well, Barbara Speak's got this new school, which was just starting, so why don't you go there? So I left the grammar school, which is pretty much where my education stopped, and went to the drama school.
Phil's West End run as the Artful Dodger would last 7 life-altering months before it was rudely interrupted by an appointment with biology.
My voice broke while I was doing Oliver, and I remember the night, I went on stage and I just started singing and nothing happened. And I suddenly felt the whole audience go, oh no, what's happening here? And I just couldn't sing. It was awful. The fate was sealed, so I had to stop within a couple of days.
But by that point, the damage had already been done. He'd felt the delights of walking out onto the stage night after night. The chances of Phil following in his father's footsteps and taking a job in insurance were slim. And the handiest part of performing in the West End? Proximity to Soho's legendary venue, the Marquee.
I used to go down there pretty much 2 or 3 times a week, I suppose, and I saw everybody down there.
The Marquee offered Phil a near-nightly education.
I saw the first Led Zeppelin gig in London.
Come on, now you're just
showing off. Yeah.
What were they like?
They're fantastic.
While he was at stage school, Phil was constantly playing in bands, but he was beginning to think that music deserved his full attention.
The last proper thing I did was Calamity the Cow, this children's film. Basically, I fell out with the director and he wrote me out of the script. And that kind of sealed it for me. I really just said to my mum and dad, listen, I've had enough. I don't want to do this anymore.
Cue a period of placing ads in the Melody Maker and responding to every drummer wanted post he could find. The so-called professional auditioner years. The most promising opportunity this method yielded was a spot singing and drumming in a group put together by hit-making songwriters Howard and Blakely. The band was called Flaming Youth, and their album, Arc 2, was released in 1969.
We did this album, you know, and I remember it got Album of the Month in Melody Maker. It was a tremendous critical acclaim this album got, and sold about 10 copies, you know, of which I've signed all of them since. I mean, I've met everybody that bought a copy of that album.
And so it was back to the drawing board. Fortunately, Phil wouldn't have to wait long for a real opportunity to come knocking.
I answered an advert in the Melody Maker which had a square around it, which said, Tony Stratton Smith requires drummer sensitive to acoustic music. And knowing Tony from the Marquee Bar, I went up to him one night and said, Tony, I hear you're looking for a drummer for one of your groups. He said, yes, it's Genesis.
By this time, Genesis were already an established act. They'd released a first album, From Genesis to Revelation, and were gigging around the country, though they weren't exactly superstars. Genesis frontman Peter Gabriel.
Our music was not considered commercial. We were told to go back to our day jobs.
Genesis belonged to a particularly intellectual strand of rock and roll. It was known as prog rock.
It meant things slightly outside the box of four-chord songs, you know. There was tricky bits, there was different time signatures, there was lyrics you wouldn't find in many other places.
All of which was fine by Phil, as long as it represented an actual full-time gig. He asked the band's manager, Tony Stratton Smith, if he might put in a good word.
He said, well, I'm afraid there's nothing to do with me. You'll have to ring Peter Gabriel.
Peter told Phil that the band would be holding auditions at his parents' house in Surrey. As well as a drummer, they were looking for a guitar player. So Phil enlisted his friend Ronnie, who he'd played with in Flaming Youth.
He had a Morris Minor, so we piled my drums into the back of the Morris Minor and his guitar and drove down to Chobham. And I can't explain, we lived in Hounslow, which was very suburban. To go to Chobham in the sunshine with a swimming pool in the back garden, this was like, we thought, this is fantastic, you know. So we knocked on the door and Pete answered the door and said, come in, you're a bit early, so have a swim in the pool while you're waiting. And me and Ronnie looked at each other, we thought, we can't believe this, go for a swim, you know. So we had a swim in the pool. And I was listening, I kept my ear open to all these other drummers that were auditioning. So by the time I got dried off and had my chance to audition, I knew all the bits, you know. And so I cruised in there and was really on top of it.
Peter Gabriel.
I always say that when I first saw him come into the room, the way he sat on the drums, I knew he was the guy. He had a confidence about him. It's like watching someone who's grown up on a horse. The way they connect straight away is instinctive, intuitive, and you know they've got it.
The gig was Phil's for the taking. Welcome to Genesis. Peter Gabriel, Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks had met at one of the most prestigious private schools in the country, Charterhouse. And joining their ranks would be a whole cultural education for Phil Collins.
When I joined, it was definitely a very tense atmosphere. And I think I was brought in as class clown, really, to be quite honest. I mean, I was the grammar school boy, stage school boy. I had the jokes, I had the new jokes, and I was a bit of a light relief.
Soon, the band's ranks were bolstered by the arrival of another grammar school boy, guitarist Steve Hackett.
I liked Phil immediately. He was open, smiley, friendly, and very, very positive. And, of course, the band had been formed at school, at Charterhouse. And I think, you know, Phil and I kind of orientated towards each other because we weren't from that sort of so-called privileged background. We hadn't suffered under the lash of all of that.
In 1970, Genesis released their second album, Trespass, recorded before Phil and Steve's entry to the band. In 71, they followed it with Nursery Crime, the first to feature the new lineup. Then in 72 came Foxtrot, their first effort to reach the UK charts at number 12. The success was driven in part by a 23-minute prog odyssey called Supper's Ready. But the triumph was clouded for Phil by personal tragedy.
I remember coming back from this New York concert. I thought we'd conquered America, to be quite honest. Come back and my dad had been a little ill, and my mum said, I don't know if Dad's going to come down for Christmas, because he by this time was living in Somerset. I remember calling him saying, please come back for Christmas, because I haven't seen you for a while. Christmas Day, I turned up at my mum's house, expecting to see him there, and she told me that he died Christmas Eve.
The death of Phil's dad at this critical moment would leave a painful question hanging over their relationship.
Was he proud of you?
Well, he never saw anything, you know. That's the trouble, really. I mean, he came to a Genesis show once in the 70s at a pub in Southall. I remember the gig, and I remember at that time we would rehearse things and want to play them, but they weren't finished, so there would be some shambolic little periods, and Peter would be, not singing real lyrics, and I'm sure Dad must have thought we were all crazy.
Phil's dad had died unconvinced about the prospects of carving out a living in rock and roll, and Phil wasn't exactly sure of the future either.
I remember we read about bands like Family that were getting £1,000 a night, so we knew it could be done, but it didn't take a long time to get going. I mean, actually, the first time the earnings really jumped was 72, 73, when Peter Gabriel started wearing hats and masks.
Foxtrot announced a new era of theatricality in Genesis performances. Guitarist Mike Rutherford.
It was a boxing stadium we played in Dublin. Came on stage, and for some reason on the album cover of Foxtrot, there was a woman in a red dress with a fox's head on. I was playing away the song, and suddenly, from the back of the stage, Pete appeared in a red dress and fox's head.
Peter Gabriel.
I remember just a moment when I walked out with this costume on, and there was a real sense of shock and horror in the audience, and I thought, oh, this is good. Try a bit more of this.
Peter's instinct proved to be a good one. Suddenly, Genesis had a reputation as an unmissable live act. Their next album, Selling England by the Pound, charted at number 3. Then in 1974, they released what many consider to be a high point of prog rock, with their sweeping double LP rock opera, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. By this time, all members of the band were contributing to the songwriting. And crucially, it had become tradition for Phil to take lead vocals on the occasional track. But it was during the tour for Lamb that tensions began to come to the surface. Peter Gabriel was upping the ante with his stage costumes. One particularly memorable character was known as the Slipper Man. Music writer Kate Mossman.
The Slipper Man is a kind of grotesque, rubbery, boil-encrusted figure in a sort of bronzy colour. And it was just one of the many costumes that Gabriel premiered. And I think among fans of that era, there's a lot of debate as to which the best costume was.
But the rest of the band didn't always approve of the theatrics.
There's a couple of moments where he couldn't get a microphone near his throat, which hadn't been thought through, obviously. He'd worked on his own with the costume designer. The Slipper Man, the main culprit. The guy who was designing the costume hadn't really thought that he had to sing at the same time. So he was kind of trying to get these big mounds of flesh out of the way, and it just started to rankle a little bit. But it never became a personal thing.
For Peter Gabriel's part, frustrations had been bubbling up since the recording of Lamb.
I'd become disenchanted with the business and just wanted to get out of music for a while. My first child had just been born, and a very difficult birth. And there were various sort of factors like that which I think helped to accumulate a desire to get out.
Towards the end of the tour for The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Peter announced that he would be departing Genesis. The band were unanimous that they'd continue without him. But there was a gaping void at the front of the stage to fill, which was a problem. They decided to write the material for their next album and audition for a new frontman at the same time.
Every Monday, people would come down and I'd teach them the words and little bits of the song. We'd do about 10, and by the time we'd finished all the material, we still hadn't found a singer.
Now, let the record show, Phil Collins had zero interest in being a frontman. He was a drummer, and he liked it that way. Steve Hackett.
He was much more concerned to be a serious, respectable musician. Drums were respectable. Singing was something that he considered to be much more ephemeral.
At the time, Phil had recently married his childhood sweetheart, Andy Bertarelli, a fellow Speak School graduate. And it was she who first got the cogs turning.
Andy, my wife, said, why don't you do it?
And, no, couldn't possibly.
But with a new album written and ready to be recorded, the situation was getting desperate.
The studio date was looming in front of us, and so we took one guy into the studio with us, a guy called John, and I don't know his last name. Well, the poor guy came in, and Squonk was the first song we tried to do. And it was just the wrong key for him. I mean, he was screeching all over the place and couldn't get high enough. And I just remember sitting with my head in my hands thinking, oh, God, because I wanted to have a go. So anyway, the end of that first night with the singer, John left, and we all said, no, it's not going to happen, is it? So I said, well, can I have a go? So literally I went down to the studio at Trident. They put Squonk on, and I had a crack, and it sounded good. And, suddenly we were a group again.
So with the least fanfare imaginable, Phil became the band's lead singer. Music writer Kate Mossman.
This is a lower middle class cheeky chappy cracking into the strange alchemy of a 1970s public school rock band. It all changes. The storytelling changes, the props change. You can't imagine Phil Collins dressing up as the Slipper Man. It's like a guy in a vest and jeans.
I never forget, my first gig was London, Ontario in Canada. And I said to the guys in the band, I'm not going to put anything on, I'm just going to stand there and sing these songs. You don't mind that? And they said, no, well, if that's what you want to do.
This was the moment of truth. Would Genesis fans accept this new, unassuming leader? Keyboard player Tony Banks remembered that moment of suspense vividly.
It was very strange. About halfway through the show, I suddenly realised this was going to work. I mean, he had his own approach to the audience, but they sort of seemed to like him.
None of which came as a surprise to departed lead singer Peter Gabriel, who still remembers the uncanny experience of seeing the band with Phil at the helm for the first time.
It's strange, it's like going to a wedding where a previous partner is now with someone else. But I think I had more confidence in how they would do after I left than they did. I mean, the band was way more popular and successful after I left with Phil fronting it than when I was there. So it became a different sort of animal.
Let me take you there, show you a living story.
The first Genesis album to feature Phil as frontman was 1976's Trick of the Tail. It reached number 3 in the UK and cracked the top 40 in the States for the first time in the band's career. At the tail end of the same year, they doubled down with Wind and Wuthering, another commercial success. But that record would mark the end of Steve Hackett's tenure with the band.
What were the real reasons for Steve Hackett leaving the band?
I think that he just wanted to be his own man in the same way that Peter did.
When Steve left the group, the band decided to continue as a three-piece instead of replacing him. By this point, turmoil was beginning to feel like normality.
This week, with a well-respected and established British band who survived changes which would have caused many lesser groups to hit the destruct button. Genesis are the gents in question, and we'll be looking at their recent upheavals and focusing on the aptly named new album And Then There Were Three in just a moment.
1978's And Then There Were Three became the biggest Genesis album to date, helped by the single Follow You, Follow Me, which climbed to 23 on the Billboard 100. Tony Banks.
It was the first hit single we had, and it sort of doubled the sale of the album. I think also being a romantic song, and we weren't known for romantic songs, the main difference in our audience is suddenly it became a lot more female came to see the group.
Before that, it was just spotty guys with fishing hats and long coats that wanted your album. Can you sign this, Bill?
With Follow You, Follow Me, the unthinkable had happened. Genesis, the nerdy prog group, had become a pop concern. In June 1978, they headlined a venue that has become synonymous with the arrival to rock's big leagues, Nebworth Park, where more than 80,000 people had gathered to watch the rebirth of Genesis.
Well, I'm in among the Geordie contingent now. There's a large flag flying above me saying Geordie's here, and they certainly are. They've got the Newcastle brown all around me. What's your name?
My name's Susan.
Who did you come down here to see particularly? Which band?
Oh, Genesis.
A lot of Genesis fans here today.
From the outside, it seemed that everything was finally coming together. But what the crowds of adoring fans couldn't see was just how much work had gone into building the band's profile. And the work didn't stop at Genesis. Phil had already begun to make a name for himself as a drummer for hire, playing with everyone from Brian Eno to former bandmate Steve Hackett, and joining a jazz funk outfit called Brand X.
I actually joined Brand X, I think in 74. And at one point I was going to leave the band. I was going to leave Genesis to sort of do Brand X full time. And then I thought about it and thought, well, hang on, maybe I can do both. Why not? So I started spending a lot of time rehearsing and just playing with Brand X.
What Phil didn't appreciate at the time was how much of a toll his absence would take on his young family. Andy had a daughter, Jolie, from a previous relationship. And in 1976, Phil's first son, Simon, was born. Perhaps it wasn't the best time to be joining a jam band.
And looking back on it now, it's just coming to me. I mean, taking that into consideration during 1975, 76, probably was instrumental in my first marriage breaking up, apart from anything else, because I just used to go down there and play. And there were kids involved, I should have just been at home or spent more time at home, I suppose.
By 1978 and the release of And Then There Were Three, Phil's marriage was feeling the strain. But Genesis were on the brink of a major international breakthrough.
So we organised these 3 American tours, which were backbreakers, really, and also 2 European tours and a Japanese tour. And my wife said to me, if you do that, we're not going to be together this time next year. And I sort of said, come on, just bear with me. I've got to do it. And now I just look back and say, why the hell didn't you say, no, I'm sorry, guys, I can't do it.
Instead, Phil committed to the brutal tour, a decision that would drastically alter the course of his life.
While I was away on tour, the house was being redecorated, and she ended up going off with the decorator.
It's worth pointing out, this is a version of the story that Andy would one day dispute, and that Phil himself would eventually find more nuance in.
I considered myself to be the injured party, of course. Now I realise that there are 2 sides to every story, and there are faults at both ends.
Whatever happened between the pair, the outcome is undisputed. Phil returned from tour to find his family in tatters, but he was determined to bring it back from the brink, even if it meant saying goodbye to Genesis.
In a desperate bid to patch my marriage up, I was going to go and live in Canada, because that's where my wife had gone, and she'd taken the kids, and I was stuck in the house. So I said to the guys, listen, if we can record, rehearse, write, and I can live in Vancouver, and we can still keep this group together, then we've still got a group. But if you can't do that, then I'm off. They said, well, hang on. You go to Vancouver for a while, see what happens. We've been thinking about doing solo albums, so we'll go ahead and do that while you sort yourself out. And that was really the wisest thing they could have said. Tony and Mike, meanwhile, did their solo albums, and within 2 or 3 months, I was back. It wasn't going to make a difference. So I came back and said, right, guys, I'm back, And they said, well, we'd started to do our solo albums now. So I started mucking about writing at home.
Back in the empty house that was supposed to be a family home, Phil Collins began to channel the pain of his breakup into his music. It was unlike anything he'd written before. Next time, on Era's Phil Collins.
If that divorce thing had never happened, I would never have started singing and writing in the way that I did, which means that Phil Collins' solo guy, as you see him now, would never have happened.
It's Phil Collins, Solo Guy.
Clearly, it was the divorce album to end all divorce albums.
At that stage, we were the smallest independent record label in the world, and I think Phil's album propelled us into becoming the biggest.
I'm Zoe Ball. This is Era's Phil Collins. If you're loving this series of Eras, hit subscribe in BBC Sounds and switch your push notifications on. We'll let you know as soon as new episodes are available.